The Young and the Restless spoilers recap Thurdays full episodes update August 14, 2025. Billy had come to France with an inflated sense of purpose, armed with nothing but assumptions and an overabundance of self-confidence. He believed that Aristotle Dumas, the elusive power broker whose financial maneuvers had rippled across multiple continents, would somehow see in him a kindred spirit, or at the very least a useful pawn. But what he discovered instead shook the foundation of his already fractured psyche. Because Aristotle Dumas wasn't just a reclusive financier or a mythical figure pulled from the shadows of international intrigue. He was Cain. Cain, his old rival, his sister's ex-husband, the man who had lurked at the edges of family dinners and business meetings like a phantom waiting to be legitimized. Now unmasked, Dumas shed his disguise with smug calculation, watching as Billy's mind attempted to reconcile the layers of deception. And still, Billy talked. He rambled about alliances, about mutual enemies, about Jack and Victor and the idea that they could bring them all to their knees. In his mind, the proposal was brilliant. He would trade access, information, the Abbott name, even illusions of loyalty, in exchange for a slice of the empire he assumed Cain was constructing. Chancellor would be his, Billy thought. Or at least he would be rewarded for his foresight. But Cain was not interested in rewarding parasites. He had plans far more ambitious, and far more vindictive. When Cain made it clear that Billy would not be granted any stake, not in Chancellor, not in Newman, not even in Jabot, the humiliation began to settle in. But it didn't stop there. As Billy pressed further, hoping to salvage something from the wreckage of his miscalculation, Cain delivered the real blow. He wasn't just targeting Victor. He was targeting everyone. The Abbotts included. And suddenly, Billy wasn't just confused. He was cornered. Because he had walked into the lair of a man who saw no difference between allies and enemies. Everyone was dispensable. Everyone was in the way. And Billy, in all his verbose delusion, had offered himself on a silver platter. Still, he couldn't stop talking. It was reflex. Defense. A coping mechanism dressed in manic optimism. But every word out of his mouth was another nail in his coffin. Cain didn't need him. He had never needed him. Billy had misread the entire script. Nick's arrival only exacerbated the dissent. He wasn't supposed to be there, not in that moment, not in that space. But somehow, fate, or perhaps guilt, had drawn him into the orbit of this unraveling mess. He stepped into the conversation like a man walking into a burning building, already aware that no good would come of it. And yet he stayed. Not for Billy. Certainly not for Cain. But for himself. To confront what had been done to him. To face the man who had dragged him into a nightmare in the south of France and left him bleeding, physically, emotionally, reputationally. Nick wasn't interested in negotiations. He wasn't there to plead or barter. He was there to see the enemy's face. And when he saw Cain, standing there beneath the Dumas persona like a snake shedding its skin, the fury rose in him like a tidal wave. Billy kept talking, oblivious or indifferent to the tension coiling around them. But Nick didn't want to hear his voice. Not now. Not ever again. The only voice he could hear was the echo of Cain's threats, the sound of Sharon's terror, the memory of crimson lights soaked in dread. Cain, for his part, revealed his cards with a terrifying calm. He wanted Chancellor. He wanted Newman. He wanted Jabot. He didn't just want them as acquisitions. He wanted them as trophies, as monuments to his revenge. The corporations weren't just businesses. They were battlegrounds. Each one represented a family that had cast him aside, a name that had loomed over him, a power he had never been permitted to hold. And now he wanted them all. To destroy. To rebrand. To make them his. It was insanity cloaked in eloquence, a delusion presented as strategy. And Billy, who had once believed he was walking into a partnership, now stood silent, realizing that he was nothing more than another obstacle to be removed. But if Cain thought the city would yield to him, he was wrong. Victor had felt the disturbance long before anyone else. He knew Cain was plotting something. He had heard whispers, seen red flags, noted patterns in market shifts and personnel movements. But now that the mask had been lifted, Victor saw the threat clearly. And he was preparing a response. Not just a legal one. Not just financial. Victor's kind of justice was personal. Thorough. Unforgiving. He would not allow Cain to stake a claim in his city, not even symbolically. Genoa City belonged to Victor. Its boardrooms, its skylines, its rhythm. It was more than a home. It was a legacy. And Cain, despite all his ambition and cunning, was an outsider playing a game he would never be allowed to win. What Victor was planning remained a closely guarded secret, but those close to him sensed the shift. The calm before the storm. The way he moved with purpose, made calls at odd hours, disappeared into his office with files and flash drives and encrypted messages. There was a war coming. And Victor was preparing to draw the first blood. He would strike in silence and reveal the damage only when it was irreversible. Cain had made the first move. Victor would make the last. Back in France, Billy finally ran out of words. Nick walked away first, unable to stand another second in the presence of the man who had tried to tear everything apart. Billy lingered a moment longer, staring at the man he had once tried to outplay, now exposed as something altogether more terrifying. And as he turned to leave, one thing became painfully clear: there were no alliances left to form. Cain had made himself king of a crumbling castle, and everyone else was waiting for the moment it all collapsed. The only question that remained was who would light the match. Would you like the next chapter to focus on Victor's counterattack, perhaps a secret alliance with Amanda or Devon, or the unraveling of Billy's credibility now that he's seen the truth but can't convince anyone of it? Jack had always trusted too easily when it came to family. Despite all the betrayals, the scheming, and the rivalries that had defined the Abbott bloodline for decades, he still harbored a belief, perhaps foolish, perhaps admirable, that at the end of it all, family mattered more than pride. So when Billy came to him, shaken but sincere, revealing the full scope of Cain's duplicity and the Dumas mask he'd been hiding behind, Jack didn't push him away. For once, Billy's voice wasn't manic, wasn't trying to pitch a self-serving idea or shift blame. It was clear, raw, and terrified. And it wasn't just about Cain going after Chancellor, Newman, or even Jabot. It was about Cain trying to destroy the legacy of Genoa City's dynasties from the inside out. Jack had seen enough corporate warfare to recognize the scent of a hostile campaign. But this wasn't business. This was deeply personal. And if Billy's intel was right, then the man they once called Cain Ashby had crossed a line from opportunist to true threat. Jack didn't hesitate. He started building his own quiet defense, protecting Jabot's legal walls, auditing internal access, initiating silent probes into unusual stock movements. He wouldn't let Cain dismantle the house John Abbott built. Not again. Not through Billy. Not through anyone. Still, something didn't sit right. There was a missing piece, a name, a wild card Jack couldn't quite place. And then it came. A message. A request for a meeting. From someone he never expected. Someone with a reputation for chaos, manipulation, and self-interest, but also with deep knowledge of Cain's international movements. The offer to collaborate arrived without conditions but dripped with ambiguity. Jack didn't know whether it was a lifeline or a trap, but the timing was too perfect. He had to wonder, was this the answer he'd been searching for, the edge to finally cut Cain down? Or was it another thread in a web being spun to ensnare him in a deeper, more dangerous game? Elsewhere, Victor was already in motion. As always, he had waited, watched, and calculated. But now it was time to act. He gave Adam the signal. The truth about Cain's alternate identity, Aristotle Dumas, would no longer be whispered in private rooms. It would be public knowledge. The press would run the headline. The name would spread across legal filings, investor alerts, and corporate briefings. But it wouldn't be released until the timing was perfect and the paperwork was airtight. Adam would make sure of that. For all his bitterness and scars, Adam could still be trusted when Victor put the right pressure on him. This was war, and the Newman patriarch had drawn his battle lines. Cain would not take Genoa City. He wouldn't even be allowed to remain in it. But as Victor consolidated power, his world began to fracture from within. Victoria came storming into his office, demanding to speak in private, her voice thick with fury and pain. Victor didn't flinch. He rarely did. But even he knew that this particular storm had been brewing. Victoria had long watched him manipulate the love lives of his children, bending them to fit some outdated sense of what the Newman name required. And now he was doing it again, engineering a wedge between Claire and Kyle, using Audra Charles as the scalpel. Claire, young and complicated, had found something close to love in Kyle, and Victor had decided that was unacceptable. Claire needed control, stability, loyalty. And in Victor's eyes, Kyle, with all his flaws and lingering Abbott attachments, was a liability. So he had sent Audra, subtle at first, seductive later, strategic always. It was sabotage, plain and calculated. And Victoria saw it for what it was. She had lived it. She had endured years of Victor meddling in her romantic choices, from Ryan to Billy to Ashland. Each time, he'd claimed it was for her own good. Each time, it had driven her further away. Now, seeing him enact the same pattern on her daughter, it made her blood boil. Victor defended himself the way he always did, with cold logic, historical precedent, and the unwavering belief that the family name came before individual happiness. He told her Kyle was weak, disloyal, tainted by the Abbott brand. He claimed he was protecting Claire. But Victoria saw something darker in his justifications. A need to control everything. Everyone. Even when love was at stake. And for the first time in years, she let herself feel the full weight of that truth, not just as Claire's mother, but as Victor's daughter. The pain he had caused her in the name of protection. The opportunities he had stolen. The hearts he had broken. And now, watching him move the same chess pieces against Claire, it all came back like a tidal wave. And Victoria began to wonder, not for the first time, whether her father truly understood what family meant beyond power and loyalty. While father and daughter clashed in a dark corner of the Newman Tower, Adam and Nick found themselves at Crimson Lights, an unintentional pairing forced by circumstance. Neither wanted to be there. Neither wanted to make small talk. But the world was spinning too fast to ignore the gravity. Nick, still bruised from his entanglement with Cain's plans in France, wanted to regroup, to refocus. Adam, though outwardly calm, carried the burden of his father's latest command. Exposing Cain wasn't just about headlines. It was about delivering a lethal blow. And Adam knew the risk. There would be backlash. Cain wouldn't go quietly. He never did. But the truth had to be revealed. And Adam would make sure it was delivered with precision and finality. Meanwhile, Claire remained unaware of the trap being set around her heart. She still believed in Kyle, still clung to the idea that they could build something real despite the chaos around them. But the seeds had been planted. Audra's presence, her whispers, her subtle undermining of Kyle's intentions, all were beginning to take root. And the day would come, soon, when Claire would be forced to choose. Between love and legacy. Between her heart and her bloodline. And Cain, in his secluded compound, sensed the walls tightening. He didn't know yet that Adam was preparing to expose him. He didn't know yet that Jack had been tipped off by Billy, or that Victoria was threatening to fracture the Newman Foundation from within. But he felt it. In the restless silences. In the jittery messages from Carter. in the subtle coldness in Phyllis's eyes. He had built a kingdom out of shadows, and now the light was coming. And he didn't know if he was ready to face it. Would you like to continue this with Jack discovering who the mysterious ally is, or with Adam making the public announcement and Cain going on the defensive?